guys, I wanted to make a quick video that doesn't really involve showing a lot of plants. I have one plant sitting here to show, but it's something that's come up a fair amount and I thought I would just give a little info on it, and that is rooting and propagation methods of soil versus water in particular, and but more than discussing the pros and cons of propagating in water versus soil, etc. I just wanted to talk about the differences and the different types of roots that plants form. And the three main types of roots that I want to talk about, and really only two of them are more important, but is for this discussion anyways, are air roots, water roots, and soil roots, and they're very different. Air roots, for the most part, now there are some caveats to this, but for the most part, they don't do much other than attach themselves to objects, usually for climbing plants. A lot of the epiphytes, even the epiphytic cactuses. I don't think I have any right here with air roots. I just thought, oh, I think I have one right here hanging, but I moved it to a different room. A lot of them make air roots to attach to other things and vine and grow, or just to attach themselves to trees, etc. But the roots themselves don't actually absorb a lot of nutrition, and the plants aren't super dependent on them. With a lot of the epiphytes, the air roots that grow out of the leaves, you can cut them off and it won't harm the plant at all because they're not really absorbing things. The same with like air plants. The roots, and I'm using those in kind of air quotes because of how we think, they definitely are roots, but the roots that they make are much more for attaching and holding on to things. They don't actually absorb stuff through those roots much. They absorb stuff through the white coating that is on them, the kind of powdery looking coating. Those are all kinds of microbes and bacteria and different things that allow, that hold on to water, absorb water, and allow the plant to assimilate it, which is awesome. But then we move to the dirt roots and the water roots, and that's where people don't understand a lot of times quite as much what the difference is, and so when we go to root things, it can be really confusing. So with these guys here, this is the only plant that I have rooting right now. And so it's obviously not a cactus, but now I gotta set this back, sorry. I unwedged my camera here. But so this isn't a cactus, but it really doesn't matter. The principle is the same. It, sorry you guys. It, the roots that form when you're doing something in water are not the same roots that form when you are propagating in soil. And that is because water is a lot different than soil, right? And plants have to adapt. And so for water roots, they are designed to absorb nutrients in water, of course, like normal roots. But the main difference that I find makes the biggest amount of confusion, or the biggest difference to the plant itself, is the oxygen assimilation properties, the differences in the roots. And with water roots, they are grown for the specific purpose of absorbing what they need, including oxygen, out of the water. Whereas soil roots absorb oxygen from the air, and to do that they need pockets of air in the soil, they need loose mix, etc. for succulents in particular. And I'll get back to that, the difference between rooting leafy plants that aren't succulent in nature as opposed to succulents, and why it tends to be less advantageous to do succulents in water a lot of times. But for now, I'll stick to here. So these roots they're not drowning in the water. They are happy. They are absorbing the oxygen that the plant needs, and everything is good. The roots are healthy and happy. Now, if I went and planted this into just soil. For these guys, and because I've done this before, they would be fine, but I would need to keep the soil soggy for a while, because what happens is these guys, when you plant water roots into soil, they are not designed to absorb oxygen from the air. So even though they have plenty of oxygen, right, because they're out of water and they're in soil, it doesn't matter. The plant can starve because these roots are not made to absorb from the same type of material. So what happens is the plant slowly starts trying to produce soil roots, and which, if the plant is a fast-growing, happy plant, it can produce soil roots before anything really bad happens and the tops die after you repot it in potting soil. However, with plants like this, they are a lot more water-loving than succulents in general, and which I'm making a general statement about succulents, but you understand for the purposes of this video. So when I plant these into soil, I keep the soil very soaking wet for a while, because it allows the plant to kind of understand that its medium has changed, but it's still, the soil is still waterlogged enough that it can absorb what it needs from the water in the soil, but it also the plant realizes it's not in pure water, and it will start producing the soil roots that it needs to grow. And so that is why a lot of times leafy plants do much better going from water to soil, like pathos and various, of the viney type house plants that are super common, that everyone roots in water and plants, and they do just fine. And the reason is because they like more water. So when their soil is wet, they can absorb what they need in the meantime to grow the roots that they need to survive in the soil as opposed to water. But we don't see any of that happen because it's all under the soil, right? But with succulents, when we go from water propagating to soil, usually we plant them in bone dry soil, right? Because that's what we're told to do. We're told when you plant succulents, you need to put them in dry soil and not water for a few days, so that you give their roots time to adjust and acclimate and heal over and scab before any water is introduced. Which is a great advice if you are just transplanting from dirt to dirt. That is fantastic advice. Don't water the roots. The soil roots need time to heal. However, if you're going from water to soil, taking it from a completely wet environment where the roots are getting their oxygen, which is so important for succulents, for their root systems. They need super oxygenated root systems. That's why we use really loose draining, well draining soil, so that there's lots of air pockets and stuff for the air circulation that they need for their roots. So when they're growing in water, they have absorbed all of that oxygen from water. The roots are not able to absorb it from air. They're just not able. So when we plant it into dry soil, all of those roots immediately start dying back. Now, the reason there's not 100% fatality rate is because succulents are amazing and very hardy. And so a lot of them can have their root hairs all die back again after being rooted in water, can just lose all their root system again, and then regrow soil roots, even if their entire water root system dies back first. And so they'll survive anyways after you transplant them, even if you put them in a really dry pot, because they're just tough that way. But for more tender succulents and ones that are a little bit more finicky about propagation specifically, when you transplant from water to soil, you need to leave the soil kind of waterlogged for a little bit, which is so counterintuitive for succulent growers, because it's like, no, we can't. But you have to really keep in mind that these roots are completely different. They are designed for completely different things and for absorbing out of completely different mediums. So if we think about it, it really does make sense. And if you leave your plant wet, plant it in some soil in a small pot. You don't want to plant something in a huge pot and leave it all soaking. It'll stay wet way too long. But if you're transplanting from a water propagating to soil, plant it in a small pot, leave it more waterlogged, and slowly taper off the water, which will stimulate the growth of the roots that you want. And give you a lot better success. So now this begs the question, why would you want to water propagate at all if you're growing the wrong kind of roots? And for some plants, I feel like the answer is you don't really want to. There isn't much benefit. If you are just writing a blog and taking pictures of happy little roots, then water propagating is probably the best, because you get roots faster when water propagating for the most part. Even if it's, you know, maybe you've seen the water bottles and people will poke holes in them and the roots just grow. That is better because the roots aren't immersed in water, and so they're not actually water roots, they're just growing towards the moisture usually. So that can work. But in a lot of the really pretty photos of glass vials and beakers, you know, full of little cuttings with great root systems, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, you guys. They look really pretty. I was going somewhere with this. They look really pretty, but, oh, yes, but they don't often show after they transplanted them into soil. They're just saying, see, this was a success because I have a great big root system. Which is true, but you have the wrong kind of root system unless you want to leave it in water. And you can leave succulents in water and just grow them in water, contrary to popular belief. They're incredibly adaptable. Now, you cannot take a succulent that is fully rooted in soil and take it out of the soil and put it in a vase and have it thrive, because it's the wrong kind of roots. And I think this causes a lot of confusion, because people hear about water propagating and they go, oh no, you can't do that, it's a succulent, it can't handle that. Well, it can if it has a different kind of root system, but typically they don't. But that's the differentiating point between sorry, not the differentiating point, that's the part that we don't think about a lot of times, is that they're a completely different type of root. You're not pulling a plant out of soil and putting it in water. It'll rot. But if you're propagating it in water, the plant recognizes that it is in water and it grows in a completely different type of roots, which is cool. I mean, they're so amazingly adaptable, and this is not, obviously not just for succulents, this is for any type of roots, and it's just a survival mechanism. So if a tree is growing somewhere and the area gets flooded, it's going to drown. However, if the tree can produce roots that allow it to survive until the water table goes down and there's dry soil again, it can live. And so that's what they do. They have these different types of roots so that they can adapt to these different types of situations. All right, what else here? I thought of something else and my mind just blanked. I'm sorry, guys, when I don't make, even if I did make notes for these things, I find it really distracting if I'm trying to read something. It's more distracting than me losing my thought every once in a while, so I apologize, you guys, when I get going and then and then forget. All right, what else about this? Water versus soil. I had thought of something else that I was going to say. What are the benefits of doing water propagation? Yeah, that's where I was going. It's a little tricky. Sometimes I for leafy plants, I find it works a lot better because I find they transfer over from water roots to soil roots better than no roots at all to just soil roots. But with succulents, I find that they a lot of times are just better off being rooted directly into soil, unless you want to keep them in water, which you can do because they will just adapt. You will need to feed them. Oh, I know what I was going to say. The other thing is, if you leave a vase with, so for example, we'll go back to this lovely little jar here. of coleus. If I were to just leave this sitting on the counter for, I don't know how long, it depends on the plant and its oxygen requirements and your water, etc., it would die because it will run out of oxygen in the water because it can't absorb it from the air with these roots. So you have to continue putting fresh water. So if you want to water culture any of your plants, which just means growing them in liquid instead of dirt, you need to change your water or have an aeration system in order to keep your plants oxygenated enough, because they definitely will run out of oxygen. So if you're using water to propagate, be sure and give your plants some fresh new water every once in a while, just to make sure that they have enough oxygen until they start developing their roots that can absorb it from the air pockets in the soil. I just thought of something else and finished my thought and it flew out. Let's see. Growing in water permanently. Oh, so what gives you the best chance of transferring your plant happily from water if you want to start it in water? The advantages are water roots tend to grow a lot. Depends on the plant. I say tend to go a lot faster. It really depends on the plant. In some plants, they tend to grow a lot faster, and they can be a good start if the plant has, especially if the plant has a lot of leaves to keep growing. If you just take a cutting and plant it into soil, you have to prune back a lot of the leaves because it just can't get the moisture it needs to keep the leaves alive while forming soil roots. But if it's in water, it has all the moisture it needs to keep its lovely leaves alive while forming some roots. And so that's one reason I do it with leafy plants the most, but with succulents also. Some of them just form well in water. The best chance of having your plant survive is to have the roots small when you transfer it from one to the other, especially with succulents. With leafy plants, if you can keep the soil waterlogged, if they're relatively happy with that for a while, and then slowly dry off as the soil roots form, you can have the roots be a lot longer. But in general, with succulents especially, you want your water roots, if you are going to transplant them into soil from the water, you want them to only be about 1/2 inch long and not much farther. When they start getting bigger, your entire plant is starting to adapt to the water, and that will mean it's going to be a lot harder of a transition to go back to soil if that's what you're doing. So using the roots kind of as a gauge and watching to make sure they don't get too long. You would think leaving them longer and having a big established root system would be better, right, before you put them into soil. But because it's the wrong kind of roots, and because your whole plant starts adapting to absorbing what it needs from water instead of soil, it's much, much better to transfer them when the roots are really small. 1/2 inch, an inch at the most, which at the most, that doesn't mean that it'll die for sure. It just means it's going to be harder. It won't die for sure. It's just sometimes a little bit trickier. If you want to have the absolute best chance of your plant transferring happily from water to soil, having small roots is a lot better. The water gives your plant enough time to kind of recover from being cut off of its mother plant, gives it some time to absorb some water and possibly nutrition depending on what you have for it in the water that you're giving it, and kind of have just a little bit of a break before it goes into soil, which is going to stress it a little bit and tries to grow its new root system. This has gone on for way longer. I thought this would be like a 5-minute video. I'm sorry. I hope that is helpful though. You guys know me and my yapping, but I hope that is helpful because I've seen a lot of really confusing stuff and people being like, how can succulents grow in water when if I overwater it once, it rots, and it's because it's different kinds of roots. And I promise if you take your beautiful succulent and wash all of the dirt off of the roots and put it in water, that it is not going to be happy. It's only when they make those special because they know that they're in water. From a cutting, that it can work really well. And if you want to leave them in water and try some water cultures for fun, I've seen some gorgeous collections that have been in water for years with succulents, and I think it's fantastic. I like growing them in soil better. I think that long term they're happier and healthier in general just because that's what they're designed to grow in. And it's hard to keep all of the nutrients that they need available in water without getting mold and fungus and different things. So I like soil better, but I love the look of succulents in water cultures. I just think they're fantastic, and I know a lot of people that do it fairly successfully. So it's something to try if you're interested in. But hopefully those tips will help you have better success if you want to grow any plants, really, not just succulents, and propagate cuttings from water, but then eventually put them in soil. So I hope this is helpful. I hope you guys had a fantastic weekend. It was just Thanksgiving week here. Of course, you be watching this whenever you're watching it, but it was just Thanksgiving week. And if you guys have had Thanksgiving where you live, happy Thanksgiving. And if not, I hope you have a great week and happy growing, everybody.